Ethan Carter leaned against the kitchen counter, the morning sunlight filtering through the blinds and casting thin stripes across the tiled floor. The quiet hum of the refrigerator was the only sound as he stirred his coffee, lost in thought. Sophie Reynolds, his girlfriend of 3 years, hummed softly as she prepared breakfast, her movements precise, almost ritualistic. There was a comfort in their routine, a predictability that had come to define their relationship, but lately, Ethan had begun to feel a small, unnameable restlessness that he watched Sophie from across the counter, noting the way her hair caught the light, how her laughter, warm and familiar, echoed slightly in the empty spaces of their apartment. He loved her, of that he was certain, but there was something lingering, something unspoken that made him question whether love alone was enough. His phone buzzed on the table. He picked it up, squinting at the screen. Malik Johnson. Ethan smiled faintly before answering. Malik had been his friend since college, the kind of friend whose presence felt effortless and immediate. Malik's voice, smooth and playful, carried a warmth that contrasted sharply with the morning stillness. "Ethan," Malik said, a hint of excitement in his tone, "I was thinking, the farm this weekend. You in?" Ethan hesitated, taking a slow sip of coffee. The farm trips Malik organized were never casual affairs. They were escapes, adventures, pockets of freedom away from the routines and expectations of city life. Sophie wouldn't come, she had her own commitments, she always did, but Malik's invitation carried an energy Ethan couldn't resist. I think so," he said cautiously. "You know Sophie, relax," Malik interrupted with a laugh. "She's busy. This is just us, a little break from reality. Trust me, you'll need it." Ethan knew Malik was right. The idea of wide fields, early mornings with mist rolling over the land, and the quiet intimacy of shared labor stirred something restless inside him. And yet, the thought of leaving Sophie, even for a day or two, made him feel a twinge of guilt. By the time Saturday arrived, Ethan had packed lightly, stuffing jeans, t-shirts, and a notebook he never used into a worn duffel bag. The city felt heavier that morning, the air thick with routine, until he met Malik at the corner of 5th and Elm. Malik's grin was wide, infectious, and his presence radiated a confidence that made Ethan's chest tighten in ways he hadn't anticipated. The drive to the farm was long and quiet at first, punctuated by bursts of conversation and laughter. Malik spoke easily about everything and nothing, stories from his childhood, odd anecdotes about city life, his voice carrying a rhythm that made the hours slip by unnoticed. Ethan found himself laughing more than he had in months, the tension in his shoulders slowly loosening. When they finally arrived, the farm stretched out before them in sweeping greens and golds, a patchwork of fields bordered by weathered fences and dotted with farmhouses. The air smelled of earth and sun-warmed grass, and Ethan felt an unexpected thrill at the sense of isolation. Here, away from the city and the constant pull of responsibility, the world felt simpler, freer. Malik handed Ethan a pair of gloves and a hat. "Come on," he said, gesturing toward the fields. "We've got work to do." Ethan smiled, feeling a warmth that had little to do with the sun. The farm demanded effort, and together, they moved through the chores with a kind of unspoken synchronicity. Feeding the animals, mending fences, collecting eggs, every small task carried an intimacy that was subtle but undeniable. There were moments when their hands brushed over a gate latch or when Malik's hand lingered slightly longer than necessary while passing a tool. Ethan felt a thrill, a dangerous curiosity that made him both excited and guilty. During lunch, they sat under the shade of an old oak, eating sandwiches Malik had packed. The conversation grew more personal, and Ethan found himself sharing thoughts and fears he had never voiced to Sophie. Malik listened, genuinely, his attention unwavering. There was something about the way Malik looked at him then, with a softness that felt different from friendship, that made Ethan's heart race. "I don't know why, but being here, it feels different," Ethan admitted quietly, staring at the rolling hills. "Like I can think without everything pressing in." "That's the point," Malik said, his voice low, almost conspiratorial. "Out here, it's just you and me. No expectations, no one to judge, no rules." Ethan felt the weight of that statement more than he wanted to admit. He loved Sophie, but this freedom, this sense of being truly seen, was intoxicating. He tried to push the thought away, reminding himself that Sophie waited for him at home, that he was loyal. And yet, in the quiet of the farm, with Malik sitting beside him, the idea of boundaries felt fragile, easily bent by laughter, shared glances, and the thrill of being in a place that seemed removed from the constraints of his normal life. As the afternoon stretched on, they wandered through the fields, the golden light casting long shadows across the rows of crops. Ethan noticed the way Malik's hand brushed against his shoulder, light and seemingly accidental, and he felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cool breeze. His thoughts tumbled, a mixture of excitement and fear. He told himself it was harmless, that it was just the closeness of friendship amplified by isolation. But deep down, he knew the feeling was more complicated than that. By evening, they settled near the farmhouse, the sky a blaze of oranges and pinks. Malik produced a small lantern, and they sat side by side, the firelight dancing across their faces. Ethan felt an unfamiliar tension, a combination of anticipation and unease, as he watched Malik laugh softly at a story he was telling. The sound was intimate, private, and the way Malik's eyes crinkled at the corners made Ethan's chest tighten in a way that startled him. He leaned back against the porch railing, the lantern casting flickering shadows across his face, and wondered how a simple farm trip had become so complicated. He missed Sophie, but he also felt an irresistible pull toward Malik, a curiosity he could neither fully deny nor articulate. As night fell and the stars emerged one by one in the clear sky, Ethan realized that something had shifted inside him. The simplicity of the farm, the quiet intensity of Malik's presence, and the thrill of unspoken possibility had combined to create a tension he couldn't ignore. He didn't know where it would lead, only that by the end of this weekend, nothing might feel quite the same again, and with that thought lingering, Ethan closed his eyes, trying to sleep while the sounds of the night whispered around him, the soft rustle of leaves, the distant call of an owl, and the quiet, steady heartbeat of a friendship that might be becoming something more. The next morning, Ethan woke with the uneasy residue of dreams that wouldn't quite dissolve. Daniel's words echoed in his mind, "Sometimes people only see what they're ready to understand." The sentence clung to him, weaving itself through every thought that day. He tried to paint, but the brush refused to move as freely as it used to. His art, once his escape, now mirrored his confusion. Over the following weeks, Daniel seemed more distant, often canceling plans with vague excuses. Yet when they did speak, he was tender, thoughtful, almost protective. Ethan wanted to believe it was just stress or fear, that love sometimes required patience. But a small, growing voice in his mind whispered otherwise. At home, Robert's behavior had shifted too. Claire mentioned during one of their phone calls that he'd been spending more time working late. She said it lightly, as though it were nothing unusual, but Ethan caught the trace of worry in her tone. He brushed it off, telling himself it was just parental instinct. Still, something about the overlap unsettled him, Daniel's sudden elusiveness, his father's absences, both circling the same unspoken mystery point. One evening, Daniel invited Ethan over to a rented apartment on the edge of town. It wasn't the first time Ethan had been there, but that night, something about the place felt different. A framed photo on the shelf caught his eye, a familiar park bench, the one near his parents' neighborhood. Daniel noticed his gaze. "You like that spot?" Daniel asked, his tone calm but watchful. "I grew up near there," Ethan replied. "It's strange. I've never seen anyone take that exact picture." Daniel smiled faintly. "Maybe we've crossed paths before and didn't know it." Ethan laughed softly, but his heart gave a small, uncertain flutter. "Maybe." As the night went on, the conversation drifted from art to childhood. Daniel listened intently, his questions gentle but probing. When Ethan mentioned his father, his rigidity, his pride, Daniel's expression shifted for just a moment, as if something unspoken had struck him. "He sounds complicated," Daniel said quietly. "He is," Ethan replied. "But he tries. I just wish he'd see me, really see me." Daniel's eyes softened, though his voice trembled slightly. "Sometimes people only understand what they're brave enough to face." The repetition of that phrase chilled Ethan. He tried to mask his reaction, nodding slowly, pretending it was just another coincidence. But the air between them thickened, as though truth hovered just beneath the surface. Later that night, when Daniel stepped into the kitchen to pour wine, Ethan's phone buzzed with a message from his mother. "Dad's been acting strange lately. He keeps saying he needs time alone. Are you okay?" Ethan glanced toward the kitchen doorway. Daniel was humming softly, the low tune oddly familiar. His father used to hum the same melody on Sunday mornings. His chest tightened. It couldn't be. His mind raced to connect fragments that refused to align: the phrasing, the park photo, the tune. They were just coincidences, they had to be. But then, Daniel returned with 2 glasses of wine and said something that stopped Ethan cold. "You remind me of someone I used to know, someone who wanted the world to make sense before they could love themselves." It was a phrase his father had once told him when he came out at 18, word for word. Ethan's pulse roared in his ears. The glass trembled in his hand. He forced a smile, pretending not to notice, not to understand. The rest of the evening passed in fragmented conversation, his mind caught between disbelief and dawning fear. When Daniel finally left for a meeting, Ethan sat in silence, surrounded by shadows. He couldn't sleep. At midnight, his curiosity overtook his restraint. He picked up Daniel's coat, which he had left draped over the couch, intending to hang it up, but as he lifted it, a wallet slipped from the inside pocket. He hesitated before picking it up. His conscience begged him to stop, to respect privacy. But his instincts screamed otherwise. Inside was a driver's license. The name was what shattered everything: Robert Cole. Ethan's breath caught violently. His body went rigid, a tremor crawling down his spine. He blinked, hoping he'd read it wrong, but the letters stayed fixed, undeniable. The photo showed his father, younger, smiling faintly, and beside it, a folded paper tucked neatly into the wallet's sleeve. Ethan unfolded it with trembling fingers. It was a rental agreement. The address was Daniel's apartment. His chest constricted, air refused to come easily. Daniel wasn't just some mysterious stranger. He was his father, not in body, but in disguise, in deceit, in betrayal deeper than Ethan could have imagined. Robert had been living a double life, pretending to be someone else, pretending to understand Ethan by becoming the kind of man Ethan might fall for. The room swayed. Ethan dropped the wallet as if it burned him. Everything, every conversation, every message, turned sickeningly false. The affection, the compassion, the warmth that had felt healing now reeked of manipulation. He stumbled to the bathroom sink and splashed water on his face, trying to steady his breathing. The mirror stared back at him, fractured and foreign. How could his father have done this? Was it a test? A punishment? Or worse, an attempt to feel what Ethan felt, to study his son's love from inside the wound itself? By morning, Ethan couldn't bring himself to speak to anyone. His phone lit up with messages from Daniel. "Are you okay? You left something behind. Please, don't disappear." He ignored them all. Each word now felt like poison. That evening, he drove to his parents' house without fully deciding why. The drive blurred past him, lights smearing across his windshield, heart pounding against his ribs. When he arrived, Claire opened the door, surprised to see him. Robert wasn't home. He said he had another late meeting, she said softly. Ethan forced a nod, his voice barely holding steady. "Yeah. I figured." He walked through the living room, taking in every detail: the framed photos, the smell of coffee, the piano in the corner. It all looked exactly the same, and yet none of it felt real anymore. When Robert finally came home near midnight, he froze at the sight of Ethan standing by the window. For a heartbeat, neither of them spoke. The tension between them was no longer invisible, it was alive, pulsing through the air. "I know," Ethan said finally, his voice shaking. "I know who Daniel is." Robert's face drained of color. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Ethan's eyes burned with tears he refused to let fall. "Was this your way of understanding me? Pretending to be someone else? Lying to me just to feel control again?" "Ethan, don't," he said sharply. "You don't get to say my name like that." Silence swallowed the room. Claire stirred upstairs, but didn't come down. The truth, heavy and irreparable, hung between them like a storm neither could escape. Ethan turned toward the door, his voice low but steady. "You wanted to understand me, Dad. Congratulations. Now you know what it feels like to be broken by someone you love." He walked out before Robert could respond. The night air hit him like glass, sharp, cold, unforgiving. As he drove away, the road ahead blurred through the shimmer of tears he could no longer hold back. Behind him, the house stood still in the dark, and inside it, a father finally faced the weight of what understanding truly meant, and for the first time, Ethan didn't look back. Ethan awoke to the soft light of morning filtering through the blinds, a fragile calm settling over him. The city beyond his window moved with indifferent rhythm, indifferent to the turmoil inside his apartment. The events of the past days lingered like shadows, heavy and persistent. Julian had been careful lately, polite, almost distant, but Ethan could feel the undercurrent of control, subtle and constant, threading through every interaction. The tension was no longer a sudden shock but a low, constant hum, reminding him that boundaries were fragile and trust must be earned, not assumed. That he moved cautiously through the apartment, checking the small routines he had established, brewing coffee, opening windows, straightening the stack of sketchbooks on his desk. The act of reclaiming ordinary life felt revolutionary. Even the smallest decisions, how far to walk in a hallway, whether to answer a text, had become exercises in autonomy. Julian appeared in the doorway, casual and disarming as ever. "Good morning, Ethan," he said, his tone carefully neutral. Ethan nodded, resisting the urge to shrink or avert his gaze too quickly. The battle for personal space and emotional control had begun to feel like its own form of strength. The days that followed tested him further. Julian's attention fluctuated unpredictably, sometimes distant, sometimes intrusive, always just enough to remind Ethan of the unspoken tension. At the same time, Leo's presence became a steady source of reassurance. They spent hours together sketching, planning projects, and sharing stories, each conversation deepening a bond Ethan had not allowed himself before. There was no need for words about what had happened with Julian. The comfort in Leo's company spoke for itself. Faceless visuals highlighted their connection through shared hands over sketches, leaning shadows, and lingering glances at computer screens. Despite the comfort of Leo's presence, Ethan knew that confrontation was inevitable. He could not continue to navigate this liminal space, caught between fear, attraction, and curiosity, without asserting his boundaries. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting elongated shadows across the apartment, Ethan resolved to speak openly with Julian. He rehearsed words in his mind, carefully balancing honesty, caution, and strength. The decision was not made lightly. Julian's presence had an undeniable gravity that made every interaction feel precarious. When Julian appeared in the living room later, Ethan's heart raced. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "We need to talk," he said, his voice quiet but firm. Julian tilted his head, an inscrutable expression on his face. "About what?" he asked, voice smooth, controlled. Ethan felt the tension coil tighter in his chest but pressed forward. "About boundaries. About respect. I need to feel safe in my own space." Julian's expression did not change, but there was a flicker in his eyes, a momentary crack that spoke more than words could. He leaned against the doorway, silent for several moments. The stillness was almost unbearable. Then, finally, he spoke. "I understand," he said, carefully neutral. "If that's what you need, I'll respect it." Ethan did not fully trust the words, but the acknowledgement itself was a small victory. The air in the apartment felt lighter, though still tinged with the weight of unspoken history. Over the next few days, Ethan began reclaiming his routines more fully. He walked through the apartment with confidence rather than hesitation, engaged in projects with renewed focus, and allowed himself moments of joy without the constant undercurrent of fear. Leo's presence remained a stabilizing force, a reminder that connection could be gentle, consensual, and affirming. Ethan realized that trust was not simply given, it was negotiated, tested, and protected. And for the first time in weeks, He felt a fragile sense of agency in a space that had once felt oppressive, yet even as he rebuilt his autonomy, Julian's influence lingered, subtle but unmistakable. A note left on the kitchen counter, neatly folded, carried words that seemed innocuous: "Hope your day goes well. Remember, I'm here if you need anything." Ethan's heart raced briefly before he set it aside. He recognized the undercurrent of control in the phrasing and acknowledged it without allowing it to dominate his response. The choice was his: to react, to ignore, or to engage on his own terms. And this recognition, this ability to define the narrative of his own life, was the most important step of all. One evening, as Ethan sat by the window sketching the city skyline, he received a message from Leo. It was brief but warm: "Want to grab a coffee tomorrow? There's a new place I think you'll like." Ethan smiled faintly, the gesture private but real. The simple act of choosing connection, of stepping toward trust and safety, felt revolutionary after weeks of uncertainty. The contrast between Leo's openness and Julian's subtle manipulation had never been clearer. Ethan was learning to navigate both with discernment, understanding that emotional clarity required boundaries as much as affection. The story did not end neatly. Julian's presence remained a part of the apartment, an ambiguous force, a shadow on the edges of Ethan's life. But Ethan's response to that presence had changed fundamentally. He walked with intention, spoke with honesty, and allowed himself to experience connection without surrendering control. In the quiet of the apartment, he recognized that fear and attraction were not incompatible with strength. They were elements that could be acknowledged, examined, and guided by choice. As the night deepened, Ethan closed his sketchbook and looked toward the dimly lit hallway, imagining the path ahead. The tension, though not fully resolved, had shifted. It was no longer a cage but a challenge to navigate with care. He understood that some questions would linger, some boundaries would need constant reinforcement, and some emotions would remain complicated. Yet the ability to confront, to assert, and to connect had transformed his sense of self. Ethan felt the first stirrings of freedom, not freedom from Julian entirely, nor freedom from fear, but freedom to act with clarity and self-respect. He could choose his relationships, safeguard his autonomy, and explore his identity on his own terms. The future was uncertain, but uncertainty no longer paralyzed him. It was a canvas, wide and open, waiting for choices, courage, and growth. And as he turned toward the window once more, the city lights reflected faintly in his eyes, mirroring the quiet determination that had begun to take root. Some shadows lingered, some questions remained unanswered, but Ethan Collins had reclaimed his footing. And in that reclamation, he discovered something stronger than fear, more compelling than curiosity: the quiet power of agency and the promise of his own resilience.